Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is Sally Whipple. I'm the Executive Director of Connecticut's Old State House, and I am so pleased to welcome you all here today. Former state historian Walt Woodward once called Connecticut's Old State House Connecticut's most sacred civic space. We think of it as the place where history and civics meet. You cannot understand the world without history, and you cannot change it without a knowledge of civics. Our public and school programs and tours reflect this belief as we work to provide people with a lifetime pathway to civic engagement. This 230-year-old State House and the buildings and lands that came before it bore witness to extraordinary historic and civic moments and movements. On these grounds, the Reverend Thomas Hooker helped plant seeds of self-governance, articulating an early vision of government answerable to the people in 1638. The generations of Connecticutans who followed him have worked hard to realize that vision. In 1833, state hero Prudence Crandall dared to open a school for young black women in this state. A law passed upstairs in this building tried to stop her and her students from teaching and learning, but they did not stop, and many of the students became educators, activists, and writers. A few years later, in 1837, Nancy Jackson, a black woman in Hartford who had been enslaved, walked into this courtroom, sued for her freedom, and won. Just a few years later, in 1839, the Amistad Africans were brought to Hartford, to this courtroom, their captivity and eventual liberation becoming a pivotal moment in the American conscience. In 1865, the men of Connecticut's 29th Colored Regiment returned from the Civil War and marched up State Street. They stood outside the building on Central Row to be welcomed home by Governor Buckingham, who praised their bravery, thanked them for their service, and apologized for a voter referendum that had just denied these men, these warriors, the right to vote. Place matters. History does not happen in the abstract. It happens in specific rooms, on specific streets, to specific people. You are gathering in one of those places now. Today, you'll hear the speakers dip into these stories as they explore the history of democracy in Connecticut. We invite you to look, to listen, to carry those stories with you, and to return to Connecticut's Old State House to continue the process of joining history with civics. And now, I would like to welcome Senator Chris Murphy, who will host this wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Sally. Thank you to all the staff and volunteers who make the Old State House accessible to the people of Connecticut. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you. I'll introduce our two guests and begin our discussion in a moment. But let me just tell you a little bit about what I imagined for the next 2 hours. This is an extraordinary moment in our country's history, celebrating 250 years since our founding and our founding documents. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us during this celebration to really look back at what has been an extraordinary journey for this country. I know for many, this political moment feels very fraught, right? A lot of people wake up with anxiety, even anger every day, but we all need to remember what a miracle this country is, the greatest experiment in societal organization, I would argue, in the history of the world. Why? Because America has done these two revolutionary things all at once. We have decided to govern ourselves, in and of itself a revolutionary idea, but also in a multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic society where frictions naturally abound, making the exercise of self-governance even harder. I'd say it's a miracle that we have lasted 250 years, and it's hard work. But part of the work involves knowing the history, how we got here, maybe even discussing moments before this one that were as equally fraught, moments where we felt like we were coming apart, and we chose to stick together. For me, having grown up just down the street in Wethersfield, my entire upbringing was imbued by the history of this state. Obviously, Wethersfield is very proud, and there's not a single question about this, that we are the oldest town in the States. So I brook no argument on that question. But you grow up in Wethersfield, obviously, and you're breathing history. Every day, I grew up attending the First Congregational Church, and we'd look outside and view the places where Washington and Rochambeau and others met. But of course, that's Connecticut's entire story, is present at the founding. So we're going to divide this time together into two parts. First, I'm going to get to have a privileged conversation with Dr. Matt Warschauer, who's a history professor at the Central Connecticut State University, and Dr. Kathy Hermes, who is the executive director of Connecticut Explored. And I'm really just going to ask them some questions so that they can talk to you about the extraordinary history of this state and how the story of the founding and preservation of American democracy really runs through our state of Connecticut. And then I'm going to be really honored to sit with the former Secretary of Education, former Commissioner of Education, former elementary school teacher, Miguel Cardona. And Miguel and I will have a little bit more of a topical conversation about the threats that are posed to democracy today. But I am not intending this next 2 hours to be and even the time with Miguel, to be a conversation about Donald Trump. We have plenty of opportunities to talk about President Trump. I'm sure his name will come up, and it should. But I just wrote a book entitled Crisis of the Common Good. And the book broadly is an attempt to step back from the day-to-day political fighting that's happening and ask ourselves, are we really building a culture and an economy that can sustain American democracy for the long term? Is Trump the primary threat, the main character, or is there actually an underlying weakness in our culture, economy, and society today that allows us to end up with somebody like Donald Trump, who is definitely openly advertising that maybe we should give up on democracy? Maybe there's something at the ground level that we've gotten wrong that we need to think about fixing. And so this next 2 hours is intended to, in some ways, be an outgrowth of what I wrote in the book, an exploration of the state's history and a discussion about the things that we can maybe come together on, right and left, Democratic, Republican, political, apolitical, that will help to strengthen our democracy regardless of what's happening in elected politics. With that, I'm going to jump in. And we should start at the beginning, I think. I'll pose this one. I'll pose questions to one or the other, but you can both weigh in. Of course, Connecticut's democratic journey starts far before the Declaration of Independence, the events that we are celebrating today. Our journey starts arguably hundreds of years before, but certainly at least 140 years before the Declaration is signed, when we start with an informal governmental arrangement between Wethersfield and Hartford and Windsor, and then upon the adoption of the fundamental orders, where Thomas Hooker declares the foundation of authority is laid firstly in the free consent of people, which is a wild thing to say at the time. It was still revolutionary 140 years later, but that's a wild thing to say in the 1600s. And so Matt, start us off by just talking about Hooker, his sermon, the fundamental orders. Why was Connecticut so far ahead of the curve when it came to the founding of American democracy?
Well, I think it's because when the Puritans come over, they're looking for freedom. They're freedom of their own religious ideals. Right? That really becomes the key. And they come to Massachusetts and then to Connecticut to pursue a lifestyle, a theocracy, really, that fits with their views of God, right? And we can go outside here, we can look right down the street at First Church and go to the Founders Cemetery down there and see the big obelisk in the back. Kathy has done tremendous and amazing work on the ancient burying ground there. And we can see that obelisk and has the names of all the first 100 settlers. One of my ancestors, Robert Day, is on that monument. All three of my kids' middle name is Day, born in Hartford. And so Hartford was really the first of the towns. But I think it is this desire to govern oneself by one's own conscience, right? And so the religious ideals and their belief in God segues perfectly into their conception of what government should be. I mean, today we understand that we have a separation of church and state. Connecticut did not separate church from state until the 1818 Constitution. Congregationalism was the established church of Connecticut. And so in a way, they wanted freedom of religion for their religion, right? We understand that. But wedding the idea that we can govern ourselves is a profound idea to keep others out of our business. And that, I think, is a core of America. We see so much of it. And, we could talk a bit today about concepts of liberty. Is it liberty to do something, or is it liberty from something, right? And these, we face this a lot. And I think when we dealt with COVID, to jump from the fundamental orders to COVID, right, we saw a lot of that. You can't tell me what to do. I have my liberty. So what does liberty mean to Americans? What did liberty mean to the people of Connecticut in this early time period? And I think the fundamental orders are just a critical component as really the first written constitution in human existence. And the fact that we have it right down the street at the Museum of Connecticut History within our state library. And it's just an amazingly beautiful document. It's a big document. And it really speaks, as you say, hundreds of years prior to a Declaration of Independence being created. So I think when we think about that, we can't look at the Declaration and go, oh, they suddenly woke up one day and said, oh, we should be free, inalienable rights. This was something that was a process that was developed, which I think really speaks to your question of where are we today? And I always prefer the term commemoration as opposed to celebration. Because a celebration is what we do every year for the 4th of July. Hot dogs, fireworks, beer, hanging out with friends. Commemoration, I think, it makes it incumbent upon us to think about where we have been and where we are and where we want to go.
So let me just ask a follow-up, Matt. What does democracy look like at that point? Is it accurate to call it democracy? How does it look in those early days that's different from what we would think of as democracy today? How much liberty, how much input do citizens have into the decisions that are being made?
Members of the church have a lot of input into what is going on, as long as you are a white male who is a Congregationalist, right? But
not.
Okay.
No,
Kathy will correct me.
Yes, all right.
Just stop.
We'll allow for rebuttals.
No, because
I don't know why she was invited.
Yeah, because, part of the fundamental orders, part of Hooker's vision was that voting would not be restricted to church members like it was in Massachusetts, and so it is actually. Sorry.
Right. No. Right.
But it was a larger franchise. You did not have to be. Membership of the church was voluntary, and you did not have to be a member in order to vote. You did have to be male, and you had to be free. And so that didn't include, at that point, African men, or even Native men at that point. But I just wanted to...
Or women.
But I just wanted to say that.
But this is true of the Declaration, too, right? When we see the words, all men are created equal, they mean white Protestant Anglo men.
Nope.
And I think this is the beauty. But this is the beauty of the Declaration, is that it is an expansive document, and different peoples over time have been able to claim it to be their own.
Kathy, let's because we're gonna have to cover a sweep of history in a short period of time here. Let's move to one of the most famous moments in this building's history. So I live down the street on Charter Oak Place, and so I drive by the site of the Charter Oak every day, and now it allows me to tell that story more often. But obviously there is an ongoing friction during this period of time between the colony and our desire to govern, and Britain, who is worried about the expansive self-governance rights of the colonies. And it culminates in this famous evening in this building when we are threatened with our charter being removed. So tell us what we know about that story, how much of the legend is true, because not everybody when I tell the story, I'm surprised by how few people in Connecticut actually know it. It's a seminal moment in our state's history.
And I think this is, so going back to the Puritan founding, the Puritans were very radical people in many ways, especially when it came to law reform. And so they were in favor of a Republican form of government during the English Revolution. So you have to see that when Charles II is restored to the throne in 1660, right, he brings the monarchy back, but a lot of Connecticutans are still very steeped in that Republican tradition. So John Winthrop Jr. Goes over to England to try to get a charter that will unite the New Haven colony, which was a separate government and much more theocratic than Connecticut was, and merge it, right? And Winthrop goes with a vision that's a lot more like what's represented in the Fundamental Orders. And he manages to get a charter that has an elected governor and an elected assembly that joins the two colonies. So this charter is very precious. It governs Connecticut right up until 1818, when the new Constitution is written. So why is it in jeopardy? Well, when Charles II died, his brother James II came to the ascendancy of the throne, and he was a Catholic. And I'll just say that throughout most of our history, being Catholic's a bad thing. I say this as a Catholic. But anyway, they don't like James. And James consolidates all of New England into something called the Dominion of New England, and he appoints one governor, Edmund Andros, to govern the whole thing. Now, this violates the Connecticut Charter. So when they're arguing about this in 1687, Andros comes to the old State House. He's talking to the Connecticut elected governor. It's clear that they're going to try to retrieve the physical charter. And the story is Joseph Wadsworth takes the document, spirits it away, and hides it in the Charter Oak on the Willis property. And the Charter Oak was a humongous oak tree. It was probably dated to the Middle Ages. So it was really hundreds of years old.
And a historically important tree, not to the native people and to the early settlers.
And because the Charter Oak was hidden and they couldn't physically get it, Connecticut did retain its rights under the charter. They had to take that charter back to England or they weren't getting it. Massachusetts wound up relinquishing its charter, had to get a new one that abrogated a lot of democratic institutions in Massachusetts. So Connecticut hangs on. There's the Glorious Revolution of 1688 in England. Edmund Andros is put on a boat, shipped back to England, and Connecticut's charter remains intact.
I have to tell you, a little over a year ago, the Connecticut State Library realized that the charter needed to be properly conserved. They needed to clean it. They needed to do a variety of things to it. It was a really big process, and I tried to convince the state librarian, Deborah Shander, to leak a story to the press that the charter had disappeared and to contact the governor's office. I said, this would be great press for the history of the charter. She didn't want to do that. We need a little more P.T. Barnum in our history.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, that is part of our history as well, right? Yeah. So, I want to ask a question that is a little off topic, but I wrote in my book about John Winthrop's famous sermon that he gives that includes this idea of the city on a hill that Ronald Reagan, used over and over again to describe, his sort of perfect conception of Americanism. And Reagan talks about the city on the hill as a description of a free place, right, where everyone can engage in free activity, political activity, economic activity. Liberty is at the sort of center of this idea. But what was interesting to me was that the Massachusetts colony at that time wasn't a super free place, and in fact, it was a place that the ethic was communitarian in the sense that the idea of economic liberty we may have today was not one that they shared. They would punish people severely if they charged slightly more for a good than was the fair price. In a country right now that has sort of lost a sense of communitarianism, that we are sort of all in this together, to what extent were people bound together in a more shared common project in these early days in Connecticut and Massachusetts than we may feel today?
They definitely feel this. All of their church covenants talk about being bound together. The Mayflower Compact talks about being bound together. They feel that they're in an enterprise that has a mission that is both, I think, religious and governmental and legal, which is to make things more open and transparent. And although they don't look free by our standards today in terms of restricting the suffrage and things like that, they were freer than just about any other place. They were certainly freer than England. And I think that's an important thing to remember, that they are performing some radical experiments. And they believe that by working together, they'll get further, but they don't last long, because in 1635 and 36, there's a big bang. That's, eventually Rhode Island and New Haven and Connecticut and all of these other colonies get founded and they split up. But I think they still retain this idea of that there's a common goal.
We are celebrating, I think, 2 milestones this year. One, the Declaration of Independence, but also the Connecticut Declaration of Independence. So little known fact that Connecticut beat the country by about a month to a Declaration of Independence. Matt, maybe start with you. What's the story of the Connecticut Declaration of Independence, and what's its importance in the story of America's founding as we start to break away from England?
What's amazing to me is hardly anybody knows
right.
that Connecticut has a Declaration of Independence. And just for fun, yesterday, I Googled, does Connecticut have its own Declaration of Independence? And the response was no. So apparently AI doesn't get everything correct. Now Massachusetts is recognized for having put forth a couple of different declarations of independence. And in fact, prior to the Continental Congress issuing its own Declaration of Independence, the historian Polly Meyer, when she was doing research on this, looked at and found 90 different documents that were sent to the Continental Congress from colonies, from towns, from individual people, all advocating independence for the United Colonies. What's really interesting about Connecticut's is that it happens incredibly quickly. On June 7th, Richard Henry Lee, the representative from Virginia in the Continental Congress, with the encouragement of his home colony, puts forth a resolution in the Continental Congress advocating that these colonies are independent and free of any obligation to Great Britain. And that is what really starts the snowball. When word of that gets back to Connecticut, so this is June 7th, when word of that gets back to Connecticut, very, very quickly, the long spring session of the General Assembly has just let out. And Governor Trumbull, who is an ardent patriot. You know, he is for the cause. He has been raised up by the Sons of Liberty 10 years earlier into that position of governor. He immediately calls the General Assembly back into session. They meet on June 14th, and they hammer out, right? They hammer out this document, this new document. And I can't figure out if it was written sort of as a collective, or if they had somebody who did all the writing. I haven't been able to find anything on this. But what we know is they hammered this out in a day. They approve it the next day. This is all on June 14th. So on June 14th, a couple of weeks ago, I was texting, all my history friends, today is the day, right? And so it's really fascinating. The preamble is particularly unique because it says, the English colony of Connecticut. That's what it says in the preamble. So they're making a point of saying, yeah, we're the English colony of Connecticut. And just, by the way, when we get to the end of this document, we are no longer the English colony of Connecticut. It's the last time that Connecticut refers itself as an English colony, which is super fascinating. And then when you actually set down, if you know the structure of the Declaration, you've got the long list of grievances, all the sections that begin with he, the king did this, he did this, he did this, he did this. Connecticut approaches it in exactly the same way, and one of the things that I do in the article that I wrote on this, and in fact there's copies of it right over here, so please take one before you leave today, is when I lay what the Declaration from Jefferson says and what the Connecticut Declaration says. And the issues and the language are remarkably similar. And what that tells us is that the language of liberty and the grievances that existed, not just in Connecticut, but throughout the colonies, it was out there. When you read the Connecticut Current, which was an incredibly important newspaper, founded in 1764, longest continuously published newspaper in the country to this day, and Ebenezer Watson, the editor of that, and then, as Kathy likes to remind me, when he passed away, his widow, Hannah Bunce Watson, took over the paper and was one of the only female publishers in the country. And so the Current is pushing these ideas. And when you read, I read the entirety of the Hartford Current and transcribed sections of it from 1775 all the way through 1776. It's a weekly.
I was going to say.
So it's a weekly, thank you. Yeah. But you go through it, and what you conclude as a result of looking at this is that the ideas, and this is what's so critical, and I was talking to one of the people in the audience before we began today, ideas are so important. And so when you bring up from the beginning, Senator Murphy, that this question of community, is there something wrong with the United States today? We are a nation built on ideas and ideals. And we have to discuss ideas. And these ideas were so infused in the body politic in the 1770s that it's only natural that Connecticut's Declaration embraces all these things. And I think it's an incredibly important document that people don't know about. And one of my primary goals of the 250th was to convince the editor of the Current, Helen Bennett, to put out an article about the Connecticut's Declaration of Independence, and I wanted to see it published in the Current. It's in there today.
Oh, nice. And, so today, only about 50, 60% of people regularly vote. There's a small group of people that are having a constant, active political conversation, but the majority of the country is not engaged in daily, active political conversation.
Only 42% of Americans have read the Declaration.
So how does that compare to this moment? At this moment, when Connecticut is debating its own declaration, when the nation is seized with this idea of independence, is there just a small group of people that's having this conversation, or is everyone seized with this conversation about what the future of Connecticut and the future of the nation is going to be?
You want to talk about a third?
You go for it, and then I'll correct you. No.
Listen, Kathy and I were colleagues at CCSU for 25 years. I'm used to this. Our offices are right next door to each other. We go back a long way. I'm like, no, you're wrong about this. No, you're. Generally, historians have looked at the American Revolution and said a third. A third are for independence, a third are opposed to independence, a big third are just sort of like, I don't know. And so we have to think about the Declaration of Independence in some ways as an advertising piece They're attempting to convince other colonists, you should join us in this. You should join us. Connecticut is really unique in that 10 years before the Declaration comes out, there's a major election in 1766 in which, and it's all related to the Stamp Act crisis of 1765. And so they have this early spring election. The election in Connecticut was always the first Monday of May. And they have this election in which the Sons of Liberty in the eastern portion of Connecticut just sweep the elections. They take the governorship, right? They defeat a governor who had been in place for 12 years, right? They take both houses of both the upper council and the lower chamber of the General Assembly. And with that action in 1766, the people who are in favor of the Patriot cause and who ultimately support when Lexington and Concord occur and 3,700 Minutemen charge up from Connecticut to go support their Massachusetts neighbors, there's a distinct chance that that does not necessarily happen unless this first political revolution occurs in 1766.
And they remain in power until the revolution begins.
And in fact, Governor Trumbull is the only governor from the colonies who remains in power throughout the entirety of the American Revolution.
So is that Trumbull's election in 1766?
He's not elected. He's elected as the deputy governor, and within 2 years, William Pitkin, the governor, dies, and Trumbull becomes governor. And that just seals the deal. And when we talk about the provision state, Connecticut is the provision state, which I know we're going to hit on, incredibly important. I've come to look at Connecticut in this time period and many time periods in Connecticut history that we are the indispensable state. We occupy such an incredibly important position politically, economically, that we are the drivers of a lot of things that happen. And without that political action occurring in 1766, there's a big question that 10 years later, we're not in a good position to support Massachusetts. We're not in a good position to advocate becoming the provision state, to being a safe haven so that Rochambeau and Washington can meet in Wethersfield. Yeah. There's so much tied to this. I just find it incredibly fascinating.
Well, broaden this out, Kathy. Tell us a little bit about Connecticut's role in the revolution. Why are we so indispensable?
So I think one of the things that you asked, was how was Connecticut participatory, right? Yep. And I think one of the things is that Connecticut's one of the most literate states. That about 91% of white men can read. About the number of women who can read grows exponentially in this period from about 30% to over 50%. And then you also have the education of Native people in schools. Don't confuse this with the 19th century boarding school situation, but schools like Moore's Charity School in Lebanon in 1754, or the Farmington School run by a Mohegan, Joseph Johnson, in 1772. They're teaching Native people to read and write. African Americans are being taught to read and write. There's large participation by free people of color and by Connecticut's black governors, and participations in elections in Hartford and Derby and New Haven for these black governors. So there's a lot of political participation. And I think what is happening in the revolution is people are divided. Fairfield County has a lot of loyalists in it because they're very close to New York. But within that division, I think there's still, quite a lot of argument going on, and we think of argument sometimes as bad. But what's bad is silence. Argument is not bad. Argument is engagement, and it's where things get worked out in the body politic. And so I think the revolution, part of the reason Connecticut is so important in the revolution is that it's not only provisioning places, it's creating a lot of the literature and a lot of the news and a lot of the ideas. And this, women are reading, women and men are reading Catherine Macaulay's History of England, which is a Republican-generated, Republican small r, Republican-generated history of England, and emphasizing the rights of Englishmen. and they're reading that and spreading it about.
To stay on time, I want to jump ahead a little bit and start to talk about the limits of American democracy, because we do use these bold phrases in both the Connecticut Declaration and the National Declaration. We adopt our Constitution in 1818, and in it we say that all political power is inherent in the people and all free governments are founded on their authority, but we don't really mean it, because obviously we are excluding big chunks of the society from those rights. This all comes to a head in Connecticut in 1839 with the Amistad trial. So maybe, Kathy, to start, can you just talk a little bit about what happens in this case and why it is significant in this period of time in the 1830s when we were beginning to come to terms with the limitation of our democracy?
In this room.
In this room.
And of course, the 1818 Constitution is important because it expands democracy in so many ways, but it also very deliberately leaves out African American men from the franchise. And they had the right to vote. If they were free African Americans, they had the right to vote before this. And then a statute in 1814, followed by the Constitution in 1818, took it away. So Connecticut's this place where there's a gradual Emancipation Act. It's a place that is not entirely comfortable with enslavement, but there is slavery all over Connecticut. And so we have to see the Amistad in that context. The ship the Amistad, is full of African captives who are being taken to Cuba, and there's a revolt as they near the Cuban waters, and the captains are made to sail the ship. They're directed sort of by the African captives who have rebelled on the ship, and they wind up in Long Island Sound. And the ship is taken in for reasons that aren't entirely clear. It's not taken to New York, it's taken to Connecticut. And the Amistad captives, as they're known, are housed, a lot of them are housed in Farmington. And the first trials are right here in the State House for 2 months. The trials are held here, and then they move to New Haven to the district court. And Roger Sherman Baldwin is the lawyer for the captives who says these people were never legally taken. Spain did not have a law that allowed them to engage in the slave trade. They had ceded that. And so if the captives were taken illegally, they are free people, right? And the case, they win the case in the district court, but the Van Buren administration in Washington appeals to the United States Supreme Court. It goes to the Supreme Court. And one of the, I think, interesting things is that, and this holds true for Connecticut as well, there are a lot of people who are against slavery, but who believe that they have to uphold the Constitution. Judges, anti-slavery judges, are quite torn because the Constitution allows slavery. And Justice Story, who writes the majority opinion for the US Supreme Court case in 1841, says, essentially, slavery is so odious to natural law. Think back to the Declaration. You have these inalienable rights, right? And it's so odious to natural law that only a law enacted by a legitimate government can undo that, okay? So because Spain did not have a law supporting slavery, those people were free, and when they landed in the United States, they were always free people. And so the captives are set free by the Supreme Court, but it's a highly technical decision that focuses on, they're not property, they were never turned into property, and I think although they win a technical victory, it's not a huge legal victory. But, I mean, they are free, so that's a big victory. But the Supreme Court did not go out on a limb for them.
Yeah.
But in Connecticut, there's a cultural shift because of the Amistad, where Connecticut becomes driven by an anti-slavery and abolition movement that grows. It's on a continuum, right? It's not everybody in Connecticut is on board with this. There's still plenty of people in Connecticut who actually enslaved people in 1839 and 1841. But it's diminishing, and there's little support for it going as time increases. And
This is where I get to say you're
and
wrong.
You're wrong. And go ahead, fight me on it.
When I was doing, I wrote a book called Connecticut and the American Civil War, and when I was looking at abolition in Connecticut in the 1830s, I found far more anti-abolition organizations operating within different towns and cities in the state than I found pro-abolition movement. So Connecticut is incredibly torn, all the way well into the American Civil War. We often like to think of Connecticut as, there's actually a book titled Connecticut for the Union, and it's just factually an error. This state was really divided. We have the largest slaveholding state in New England, upwards of 5,000 to 6,000 enslaved people. We do enact gradual emancipation in 1784.
But it's gradual.
It's gradual.
Yeah.
I mean, they get rid of slavery much faster than. I actually have a graduate student working on this for his master's thesis right now to better understand early abolition, because historians really don't fully understand it. You would think that we'd know it all, but we don't. But Connecticut is incredibly divided over the issue of race, and this speaks to the history of the Connecticut 29th colored regiment, that Abraham Lincoln allows black troops to be enrolled with the Emancipation Proclamation. Massachusetts acts like that. Governor Andrews in Massachusetts creates the 54th Massachusetts. We've all seen the movie Glory, perhaps. Connecticut, our governor doesn't put through the legislation to create the Connecticut 29th until late in that year. Because he knows that the people of Connecticut are not going to be in favor of it. So we are, we like to think of ourselves as this traditionally blue state, but the arguments over abolition and over race were profound in Connecticut.
I think it's easier for them to deal with something like the Amistad, where the captives are directly from Africa and they're not staying. 35 of these 56 people go back, than it is to deal with the presence in our midst, kind of.
So,
thing.
okay, so let's, this is obviously an incredible moment, right, as we're leading into the Civil War, and it's an important moment to understand and study, because as we feel as a nation that we are coming apart today, it is important to remember that there have been other moments where we didn't think we could stick together, this, of course, being the primary example. The thing I wanted to talk about is that a national movement starts here in Connecticut, a group called the Wide Awakes, which, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding of it is that this is a movement that starts upon Lincoln's visit to Hartford. They are ostensibly guarding Lincoln, acting as bodyguards to him, which also speaks to the threats of violence that existed during this time. A big part of the 1850s and 1860s is the constant threat of political violence. It sort of just sat on top of our politics permanently. It's something important to remember as we grapple with violence sitting on top of our politics today, again. And the Wide Awakes, which become this national movement, right, starts here in Connecticut upon Lincoln's visit. You want to talk a little bit about this movement?
So Lincoln actually comes to Connecticut almost by accident. Yeah. He is up further north in New England visiting his son, who's at boarding school, and he gets letters from members of the Republican state convention saying, we need you here. And we've also got to remember that at this point, when he first arrives, Lincoln is not the candidate for president yet. The convention hasn't met, he hasn't been chosen, but he's incredibly popular. He has given this important speech at Cooper Union in New York, and he's become really famous, and a lot of people are looking at him. And so the Connecticut, members of the Connecticut Republican State Convention contact him and say, we need you here. An important election is coming up in Connecticut, and they want, and they're really worried that the Democrats in Connecticut, who are the ones who are most in league with the South, that they're going to win the control of the state. And so they bring Lincoln in, and he gives 5 different speeches in various cities around the state. And Hartford, you have these young men that create these sort of military style, they do it by themselves, they create these military style uniforms that have this sort of oil cloth on them so that when they carry these lit lanterns, they don't set themselves on fire, which I think is a very good idea. And it becomes the wide awakes. And as you say, this idea of we are wide awake and we are watching what's happening here. And as you say, violence is, the Civil War, when you look at the Midwest, you look at Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, the Civil War is already going, right? It is, we talk about John Brown, our Torrington guy, right? The Civil War, a lot of bloodshed has already occurred in the early to mid through the 1850s. And that, everybody knows this. And so you get the wide awakes, and it's remarkable. The Museum of History and Culture, Connecticut Museum of History and Culture, has some really great artifacts from various wide awakes. It's a neat facet of our history.
Kathy, I want to fast forward now to the great sort of urban expansions that begin to happen in Connecticut. The story of Hartford is really exceptional in that it grows by just leaps and bounds, right, over a handful of decades, starting in the mid-1800s, but of course continuing through the early 1900s. The other current issue that America is struggling with is not a current issue, it's an ever-present issue, which is the issue of immigration and migration. And we have a president today who says America can take no more, and the entry of people to our nation who have different religions, different languages, different belief systems are a threat to the identity of America. That conversation has been with us for a long time.
A long time, yep.
So as America and Connecticut starts to grow, as my ancestors, show up here, first fleeing the famine in Ireland and then later as part of the big Eastern European migrations, what do they find here in Connecticut? What's the, is this a welcoming state for immigrants? Are they seized with the same conversations that we're seized with today?
A lot, yes. And let's just take that, we'll start with the Irish. Okay, because of course, one of the big objections to the Irish was that many of them were Catholic. And a lot of American Protestants don't think Catholics can be Republican small r, right, or Democratic small d, because they have allegiance to the Pope. And so there's a great suspicion about whether, if you let too many Irish people in, will they become good citizens of the United States? And there are no sort of real immigration laws at this point restricting people, but there's a lot of animosity and violence towards the Irish. But the Irish, when they come to Connecticut, there's an industrial revolution going on. They fall right in and they work on the Farmington Canal and they start building things. And one of the strategies of the Irish in particular is that they see the way forward as in public and civil service. And so a lot of Irishmen become police officers, firemen, civil servants of different kinds. And I think every immigrant group kind of enters Connecticut the same way. The first thing they do is it's sort of manual labor, anything you can find, and then they find their niche, whether it's in the building trades or in farming, or it depends. But every immigrant group finds their niche, and the Irish in particular go into public service. And so the first Irish descended governor is elected in 1881, Thomas Waller. And think how rapidly that is. I
Right.
mean, from the 1850s, now there were Irish present in the 17th century, but we're talking about the big influx here. This is pretty remarkable. And I think, we see in the 20th century, the Polish immigration, we have, I think, the largest Polish diaspora population outside of Chicago. Within the United States. It's tremendous. Connecticut has welcomed Italians and Portuguese and all that. It's sort of funny when people still think of it as like descended from the Puritans or something, because they're kind of long. They're around, but not, they're overwhelmed by Italians and Polish people and Irish people. And it's a remarkable history because they advocate for the suffrage. You get women's suffrage movements in the from the 1850s onwards, and then, of course, women get the right to vote in 1919. And that's a big step for expanding democracy.
Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the immigrant experience here in Connecticut and what we can learn from it.
Well, I'm happy to say I agree with Kathy.
Has to happen sometimes.
Connecticut is, there's a tremendous amount of pass-through in this state as well. So we're talking about Connecticut and what Connecticut's contributions are, and immigrants coming into Connecticut. We have immigrants that are coming from the beginning of this colony through the state's history, well through to today. But we also have immigrants that are passing through this state on their way to other places. And so Connecticut's influence in other parts of the country are really great as well. And as Kathy was saying, the Irish engage in this service. One of the ways that the Irish show their citizenship and their patriotism is to engage in the Civil War, right? And they create the Connecticut 9th Irish Regiment, which, and they prove themselves in the midst of the Civil War. So that's another way to the sense of becoming a full American, that they provide service. Connecticut, you talked about the Polish community. Look at the Puerto Rican community. We have one of the largest diasporas, I think second only to New York, right?
Yep.
So
we also had the first Puerto Rican to serve in the U.S. Army was during the Civil War.
Right.
He came from New Haven.
Yeah.
Well, he came from Puerto Rico, migrated to New Haven. Puerto Rico was not part of the United States at that time, and served in the Army. Yep.
Well, so we still have this history of immigration. And I know we're going to talk about it at some point, but our state motto is Quae transtulit sustine. He who transplants, or that which is transplanted, is sustained. It comes into being with the old Saybrook colony, 1635, the rest of the Connecticut colony when we formalize, embrace that. It's been our motto ever since. And I can't think of a more accurate motto for the state of Connecticut and the people of Connecticut, because we are a state that has had constant immigration, constant change. We transplant ourselves both within this place and outside of this place, and our families come here and they flourish, right? What a better motto. I can't think of another state that has a better motto.
A good note to end this portion. We're going to bring you back up for questions after Secretary Cardona joins us, but give a round of applause to Matt and Kathy. What a spectacular presentation. You guys can go sit there. Well, we are you can take your water, great. We are so proud to have with us the 12th Secretary of Education, but more importantly, Connecticut's own former teacher, former school administrator, former commissioner of education. Please welcome to the stage my friend Miguel Cardona. Hey man, how are you? Good to see you. Take that one, take that seat. Miguel, welcome. And it's great to be with you and to get to try to avoid current events with you, although it will be hard. So I really wanted to talk to you during the second piece of our conversation today just to step back a little bit and talk about where our democracy is today, to talk about what we need to do as citizens to fix it and protect it. But I thought I'd start with you on your book of business, on your portfolio, on your life's work. One of the extraordinary things that America does before any other high-income nation makes a commitment to public education, right? And if you read about the debates around public education, which are really happening in Connecticut and Massachusetts first, it's Horace Mann and the people that surround him in Boston. He's got friends here in Connecticut. They really are thinking of our education system, not as a way to educate workers, but as a means to educate citizens and to try to provide something that binds us all together. In the period of time where public education is becoming a mainstream idea, there's a lot of violence in America, some of it coming from new entrants to the country, to lower income workers who are feeling like they're not part of the project. And so education, public education, is seen as a way to bind people together. So, when you think about, and this is a huge question, we can go a bunch of different ways with it, but as you think about the threat to democracy today, having spent your entire career in America's education system, what's the connection between the quality and inclusiveness of our education system and the quality and the inclusiveness of our democracy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for having me here, first of all. Great to be with everyone here today. Thank you for being here as well. And I was standing in the back, and I feel just in the 10 minutes that I was listening in the back with the first panel, I feel smarter already. Yeah. I wonder if everyone's going to get like 3 college credits for. Look, they're linked in a way that the longer I'm in education, the more strongly I feel that it is the foundation of democracy. Education, public education, access to education is the foundation of democracy. I spoke to a young man from Afghanistan about 6 months ago. He was a student at the Kennedy Center at Harvard. He's from Afghanistan, and he was telling me that his goal is to preserve or build up public education in Afghanistan, because he said, in order for democracy to come after, we have to start with public education. He understood that. That was his goal, to be the Minister of Education in Afghanistan. And in America here, not only in the beginning, but I think now I see it more clearly that if we attack public education, if we attack the funding in higher education, we are weakening our democracy, and I often say we are doing our enemies' work for them. Mm-hmm. In very few other countries is my story possible. I heard the last segment about the first Puerto Rican fighting the Civil War. My parents came from Puerto Rico, and 45 years ago when I walked into kindergarten, I was an economically disadvantaged Hispanic English learner walking into John Berry Elementary School in Meriden, Connecticut. And it was because of that public school experience and the state college system in Connecticut, I was able to go from that kid who betting people wouldn't have bet on to advising the President of the United States. I'm an N of 1, if you will, of what's possible in public education. And I think its preservation, public education, is what will strengthen democracy. I do believe there's a strong correlation between that. And not only at the beginning of our country's forming, but now when it's under attack, is that more clear that public education is the foundation of democracy?
We were talking about our history of immigration as you were walking in, and of course, the president is telling us that multiculturalism is a bad word, right? It's a weakness or a liability in this country, and of course, that just doesn't ring true to anybody who knows this story. But Meriden is a unique town in this state in which, because you do have real socially and economically and racially integrated schools. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist in most communities in Connecticut, but in places like Meriden and Stratford and Danbury, you go to school with kids of different incomes, of different races, often with different languages. And when I walk into Meriden schools, I'm just going to tell you, it feels a little different. It feels a little bit more alive. It feels like there's two different educations that are happening at the same time. The classroom education and the education that you're getting by being in a diverse place. So you do this riff better than I do, but we're being told that living in a country with people different from you is a threat to democracy. Why is that a fundamental lie?
And to your point, Meriden is home. I went through school there. I was a teacher there. I was a school principal for 10 years there. I was a district leader. My children went through those schools. My wife worked in those schools. That's home. That's my community, right? And I still live in Meriden. I chose to stay in Meriden. And I wanted my children to go to that school because of exactly what you said. I want my children to be able to navigate diversity and folks that come from different backgrounds. That makes them better, well-rounded people. Our country's formation and growth and innovation comes from that, the diverse perspectives that are here. I think part of the reason why part of the reason why we grow as a country is because of the diverse perspectives. And it reminds me of a conversation I had with the Minister of Education from Singapore. Top of the list on a lot of, academic measures, or PISA scores or whatever. And we were having a conversation and he goes, our country is always at the top of the list. The US is not. Yet, innovation, all the best ideas come from the US. What's happening over there?
Why, right?
Why?
Why the test score is not as high, but you're still driving change,
Why? Because of the diversity that we have here. That anyone can come here with a dream and chase that American dream. And I'm not saying it's the same for everyone. Some people have to work 5 times as hard. And you talked about Connecticut and Meriden's diversity as a strength. I lived it. I became the best candidate for President Biden, not in spite of my experiences, but because of it.
Right.
He told me that. The schools, the mic fell, but if you can hear me, I'll just keep going. The schools, 46% of our schools were open in our country. Only 46% when I took office.
Right.
He wanted somebody that understood how to work with people from different backgrounds to make it open, to open schools. So it was that Meriden experience. It was going to a technical high school, learning how to fix cars with people from Southington, Cheshire, Wallingford. And I'm a Meriden kid trying to understand different cultures, different customs that made it possible when we were reopening schools in Connecticut to hear different perspectives of people that said you shouldn't do it. People said you should do it. It was because of that lived experience, right? You talked about the diversity in Meriden and how Connecticut Meriden is almost like an anomaly, right? And you're absolutely right. As Commissioner of Education, I sought to bring out the fact that I think 80% of our poverty or 80% of our free and reduced students are in 30 communities. So as much as we talk about the beauty of the diversity, there's a lot of differences, in one community, and you go down the road, Bridgeport and Greenwich could be further apart in so many different ways, yet geographically they're right down the street from each other. So there's still work to be done, but the beauty of Connecticut and the beauty of our country is that people come from different backgrounds under one flag and do some amazing things. And I feel blessed to be a part of that.
I think I love that story from Singapore, right? Because it just speaks to the fact that, listen, we want to get our test scores up, we want to be number one in everything, but the education doesn't, happens, not just with your head down in a textbook. The education happens by being in a place with people who are challenging you with different belief systems, different languages, different backgrounds. Let me fast forward us, and we're going to get off education in a second. But what's going on in higher education today is a part of the story of America's democratic weakness, because arguably the biggest divide in America right now is between people that have a college education and people that don't have a college education. If you just want to sort of look at the clearest dividing line between who voted for Donald Trump and who voted for Kamala Harris, it's, did you have a college education or did you not? And there is something boiling in America because it's more important than ever that you have the college education. The wage gap is bigger than ever before, but it's less accessible. And so people are enraged. They're saying, wait a second, you're telling me that I have to have the college degree in order to make a living wage, but I can't get it because it's so expensive? That's a real democratic crisis, because if we don't fix that, if democracy can't fix that cruelty, you have to have the degree, but we're not going to let you get it. We're only going to have rich people get the degree. If we don't fix that, I don't know how we save our democracy.
The haves and the have-nots, it's getting wider.
It's getting
and
wider.
You're right. It's no longer a luxury to have higher education. You know, I can cite research and reports, but the reality is, increasingly, you need at least a 2-year credential or degree. We were 2 votes away. I don't have to tell you this. We were 2 votes away from Build Back Better.
Yeah.
President Biden was really big on 2 years early childhood, 3 and 4-year-olds, and 2 years after.
Expand the guarantee.
Expand the guarantee. 2 votes away, Manchin and Sinema.
Right.
That's how close we were to giving access. Right now, it's hard. Having access to higher education, it's challenging. It's getting more and more challenging. The debt that's accruing is making people as young as middle school. I had a middle school student come to me when I was assistant sup in Meriden, who, one of the brightest kids that I had when I was a school principal. He said, Dr. Cardona, I'm probably gonna do something else. I'm not gonna go to college, it's too expensive. The kid was like 12. And his father was with him, kind of nodding with him. It was out of the question. Imagine the lost potential in this country, man.
Yeah.
You know, like, what if we gave access and treated it as a public good? We'd all be the beneficiaries. Now, I think, you know, we have to really, the accessibility issue is one thing, and I think we have to make sure that doesn't mean we have to keep the system the way it is.
Right.
Higher education needs what I call evolution. And I think it's stagnant. I think it needs a shakeup. I think it needs greater accountability. I think it needs to explain its ROI better. You know, but I do believe that increasingly the lack of access is going to lead to a liability for all of us, especially because we have tremendous talent that never gets tapped because higher education is not accessible to them.
Yeah. So let's talk about another threat to our democracy, and that is technology. Technology is spiraling us into lives of isolation, and I think a lot about the people who attacked our Capitol days before you were sworn in on January 6th, and I think there were probably a lot of lonely people in that crowd. There are definitely a lot of people who had been convinced because of their online life that there was going to be a revolution that day,
Right.
led by QAnon, right? But our kids are also being spiraled into lives of isolation. We're being sorted into camps by the technology. We have less opportunities to come together. What do you think about the way that technology is a threat to democracy, and
Sure.
especially, you know, what we need to do to protect our kids?
Sure. That's a loaded question, and I have a lot of thoughts on that, especially because on my way to the Capitol for President Biden swearing in on the 20th of January in 2021, the streets were lined with police officers from all over the country. It looked like a war zone.
I remember that. You had not been.
So no, we went to the nominee, the candidates for secretary, cabinet members. We were there together.
Yeah.
But we weren't sworn in. I got sworn in March.
Yep.
It literally felt like a war. Like there were folks with M16s on every corner.
Yep.
And I'm like, what am I getting myself into here?
Fencing everywhere. Yeah. Yep. It was awful.
It was the furthest thing from democracy.
Yeah.
You know, So, social media has had a tremendous impact on what we know to be group polarization. Our algorithm brings us to people that agree with us, so we feel stronger about the positions that we have. And that's all we feed ourselves every day. When you get on your phone, you're feeding, that algorithm is keeping you there, right? That's group polarization. So we go deeper in our camps, and that's on both sides of the aisle. But it leads to behaviors that are dangerous for our country. I argue, and I tell leaders across the country, the innovation in leadership is how do you cross that line? How do you challenge that? How do you prevent group polarization even if you disagree on policy?
Right.
That's the challenge of leadership. So going back to your question, what did it do? It harmed. You know, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy and I worked together in 22 and 23 to address the youth mental health crisis. In 2021, 1 in 3 high school girls considered suicide. Think about that. 1 in 3 high school girls. So it has contributed in many ways to negative things. And then if you indulge me for a second, this is where I feel we are, and I'll get to the risks. I feel like the youth mental health crisis that came from that was emboldened by the social media craze, unchecked, was the middle chapter. I'm going to go back. When I started teaching in the 1900s, back when Brian was a student of mine, Brian Crow-Francesco over there, the internet came out. And I was one of those cool young teachers that wanted that big Mac computer. My kids could play Oregon Trail. I was a cool teacher.
Yeah. I remember Oregon Trail.
Remember that? So the internet was great. You could learn things. You could take a virtual walk through the Smithsonian for kids from Meriden who can't even get on a bus and go visit a museum. But it also had dangers. 9-year-olds saw things that they shouldn't see. It was left unchecked. There were no parameters. Fast forward 15 years, 2010. Social media craze. Amazing. I got to talk to cousins in Puerto Rico and connect with them and see family members that I hadn't seen in years. My kids were able to, make friends with people and have connections with people. But there were no guardrails. And what happened? It contributed to a youth mental health crisis because they were being fed things all day. And we saw what happened. We're in chapter 3 now, AI. Tremendous potential. I'm excited about it. I don't walk around like Eeyore, doom and gloom. I'm excited about the potential. But without parameters, we're going to be seeing what we didn't learn from chapters 1 and 2, we're going to experience again. There are no guardrails right now. People are scrambling. Our kids are using it. We just don't know that they're using it.
Yeah.
Can I share something with you? Or can I ask you a question? I'm working with a company that their intent is to provide protections. They did a survey of a major city, in a capital city in one of our states, and looked at what 6th graders to 12th graders are spending their time on their district-issued device. Not their personal, their district-issued device. What do you think the number one thing that the kids were spending time on their computers? TikTok. Anybody? TikTok?
ChatGPT.
ChatGPT? YouTube? No? AI romance.
Yeah.
Oh, it's happening under our noses on our district devices. And we're not, the adults can't figure it out.
These are these friendship bots, essentially.
And more than friendship.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a nice
AI
way to say it.
romance, you got little 12-year-olds falling in love with some bot they created. Scary, isn't it? So when you ask, what are the dangers? We are, the social media revolution created a lot of people that had self-conscious or bullying, a lot of youth mental health crisis. If we do not stand up for our kids and protect our kids with this amazing opportunity of artificial intelligence coming into our schools and into our country, we run the risk of harming kids again. Doing nothing is harming kids. Now, I say that, and I also say we have a responsibility to embrace it, to teach digital citizenry and to recognize that if we don't embrace it, China's not going to wait for us to catch up. So it's an opportunity in education that we must recognize the potential, but the risks if we don't do it well.
Yeah.
You know, that's, and I make it analogous to the internet in the 90s. I make it analogous to social media in 2010s because we saw the data after of what happened when we let it go unchecked. But there is tremendous potential as well.
Agreed. And, you know, I just see in my life the number of people that are using AI for moral advice and moral reasoning, right? So you're reaching out to AI for friendship and companionship and romance. You're also using it, you know, for moral and moral judgment. And I'm gonna say something here, and it'll get to a question. But one of the most important writers of the last 100 years on protecting democracy is a woman named Hannah Arendt. And Hannah Arendt was German-born, came to the United States, wrote sort of a lot about the origins of totalitarianism in Europe. And she writes that the primary accomplice to totalitarians is rootlessness, that you don't have roots anywhere. And you don't believe in anything, you don't belong to anything. And so you just sort of outsource your moral reasoning to the regime. And you know, that's what the risk is with AI, that we essentially outsource our moral reasoning. We outsource all of these basic human functions, creativity, conversation, problem solving to the machines. But she says that the greatest antidote to totalitarianism is roots. And she says it's the chess club, right? And you know, if you belong to something, if you have a community, you are less susceptible to believe the scapegoating that happens from the totalitarian. You're less likely to outsource your identity to the totalitarian. If you have roots, you can resist. And so in a democracy, you have to have roots. And so I want to ask you about this because, and I'm coming back to Meriden again, right? I knew you originally and your family as the people who would ride around in golf carts at the Puerto Rican festival, making sure that every vendor had what they needed, that the festival was running on time, that the acts were showing up when they were supposed to act, right? Like you and your family were like the embodiment of community to me before I ever knew that you were a hotshot, you know, principal and educational leader. And your family like built a community in Meriden, a community that like people belonged to. But now with social media and AI and the internationalization of commerce and the flattening of our culture, like it's harder to belong to a place. And I've always wanted to ask you this question, like do you agree that having roots is so important in a democracy to protect against somebody like Donald Trump? And what from your experience educates you about how to build community the right way?
No, you're spot on. Community, the word community. When I was secretary, or even as I was transitioning to secretary, my kids were learning, like everyone else in 2020, from the living room, right, with their screens. And they were not happy. My daughter was a freshman, my son was a junior in high school. They weren't themselves. And you know, it comes down to not missing a class or not even missing an extracurricular activity. It's missing community, being a part of something. They miss that. So much so that my daughter downloaded House Party. The young people are smiling at me right now. So you're all young, smile, that's fine. My daughter downloaded House Party. It's an app, so she could have some socialization. My son played Madden football on his Xbox because he could hear his cousins and he can talk and have banter. He missed community when he couldn't be around people. Community's huge, Senator. I have to say, the Puerto Rican Festival, the belonging of Meriden. I'm rooted in a tribe. Mm-hmm. And that's such a human thing in us that when it's gone, we seek it, and sometimes we seek it in the wrong places. I do believe that's part of the reason why people are going back to religion. I really do believe that.
Yeah.
Because maybe they had a period in their lives, the last 5 to 10 years, where they were not a part of something. They weren't a part of community, like you said, and now they're trying to find it back. For me, the strength in roots, I was raised, my parents came from Puerto Rico in like 1960 as young people because my grandfather was a sugarcane farmer in Puerto Rico. Domino Sugar came and took over all the island sugar cane fields, and he was left without work, so he came to Hartford to cut tobacco using those skills. My mother's mother had cancer, so they came here to get better medical treatment. But my father, he lived in Mills apartment, and if you know anything about Meriden, it's like the worst housing project in Meriden. But that was home for him, and he built community there.
Community there, yeah.
And then he realized, I want to give back to my community. So he became a police officer. Went back, got his GED, became a police officer. Served for 32 years. And this service to community was a big part of it, was a big part of how we grew up, right? So he and my mom, they were young Puerto Rican people who were trying to make it in Meriden. My mom always had a meal for someone, serving community. And then they raised 3 kids, and my brother became a police officer. He's still serving. My sister became a social worker in that same community, and I became a teacher in that same community. It was all about community. And whether it's teacher or secretary of education, it's just service to the community.
Yeah.
I went from 21 kids to 65 million, but it's still the same thing, right? It's really about community and roots and being a part of something bigger than you. That's something that I was raised with. And I think people are longing for that, to be a part of something, like you said, the chess club, to be a part of something bigger than them. And we have to protect not just children, because adults too. I would argue that there's a generation, 70-year-old up, that is similar to the Instagram generation. You're either watching Fox or MSNBC. And that's your group polarization, because you get that fed to you every day. That's your algorithm.
That's your identity.
Yeah.
Right.
So, community is a really big part of my upbringing. As a matter of fact, coming up, if it weren't for those strong roots that were laid in the community, I wouldn't have the confidence in myself to be the counterexample, right? I was confident in myself, in who I was, not because I had wealth, but because I had a strong community that believed in me.
So it's interesting that you note sort of what's happening with MSNBC and Fox News. It's extraordinary the number of people today whose primary identity is a political identity.
Yeah.
And political identities are not always inherently unhealthy, but they are an oppositional identity, right? You wake up in the morning knowing who you belong to and who you're trying to beat every day. And so it tends to be that you find lonelier people tend to anchor their identities in political identity, and it spirals you into a level of anger and oppositional behavior that is not always healthy. Other kinds of identity, whether it be a church identity, a local identity, a school community identity, are not inherently oppositional,
right,
and they tend to be a lot healthier. And so my argument that I make in this book, and I make generally, is that we have to think about ways to make other forms of identity more accessible, right? So how can we potentially subsidize the institutions that have evaporated, from churches to labor unions to civic clubs? How can we make local downtowns healthy again, so you feel like you belong to a unique economic place? How do we make schools a place of real community? One of the things I suggested in my book, and I should have run this by you before I suggested it, but I said, what if we spent a small percentage of federal education dollars on subsidizing PTOs? Making PTOs healthier, allowing them to do outreach, maybe they do meetings at more convenient times. How do we make schools not just be the place where kids learn, but the place where a community forms?
Yeah.
Just reflect on that specific idea, because you lit up a little bit when I said it.
Yeah, no, because I think of my years as a school principal, the best job I've ever had. It was like a little town. It was a little, I called it little UN. We had children who are bilingual, who were coming from Central South America. We had children with significant disabilities, children with autism, children with developmental delays, children with Down syndrome, and we had programming in there. That was the best community, man.
Yeah.
It really brought out the best in everyone.
But you got to build it intentionally.
You got to build.
Right?
It has to be intentional.
Because
You're right.
because it doesn't just happen.
It has to be
choose
intentional
to build it.
So to your question, if done right, it can do great. But if done badly, it has the potential of exacerbating some ideologies over others. You know, a well-developed civics program can do that for you, right? Embracing diverse perspectives, because everyone is better when we have different perspectives. Cognitive science is catching up with that, right? When you have different perspectives, you tend to be more intelligent, better with reasoning and problem solving. And yet, what we hear is the opposite, that diversity is bad. You know, I don't understand, in a country like this, country's an idea. How can you say diversity, equity, or inclusion is a bad thing? Yet, I travel the country and I talk to leaders in blue states who don't even use the word diversity, equity, and inclusion anymore because it's been stained. I'm like, what the? You know what? How far backwards have we gone? This country was formed on diverse perspectives. We're stronger because of it. Now, that's almost like, are we stronger because of it? But you're right about the intentionality. It has to be woven in. And I firmly believe, I'm an optimist, we will come to a point where soon, and I say soon, people are going to say, you know what? We need to do better for this country, and we need to come across, both sides of the aisle come together around something, some common ground. Much like you did with the immigration. I talked about that so much in 24. It's imperfect, but you came to the table with Cornyn, right?
That was with James Lankford, senator from Oklahoma.
Like, that modeled what I felt leadership needed to do, because we don't agree 100%, but we need to come together to do what's good for everyone. And we don't see enough of that. Yeah. But that has to be structured and intentional. It's not going to happen, and I think if you let it go, it's going to go back to the group polarization.
I'll tell you what we're going to do here. I want to ask Miguel a couple sort of more topical questions, and then we're going to bring Matt and Kathy back up, and we're going to take questions. So get your questions ready. But before we do that, two more topical questions. The only thing that you have in common with the current Secretary of Education is that you're both from the same state. What do you think of what's going on there right now as they are trying to destroy the Department of Education? This has to be both heartbreaking and maddening. We're not going to let them do it, but they are trying.
Yeah, they are trying. It is disappointing. I know the people that were laid off. I know the people that gave 30 years of their lives in public service who were given 30 minutes to clean out their offices. I was there when they came out with their boxes crying. So it's personal. But again, look no further than my story. First generation kid who had only what the public schools provided. Making decisions with the President of the United States. That's America. Democracy is bigger than any one administration. And it's going to prevail, and we're going to do better, and it's going to be stronger. But what I see happening now is the implementation of what started on January 20th, the same day he took the oath of office, was Project 2025. It started, and I can tell you, as secretary, there was a boogeyman every year. First, it was CRT. Then it was homophobia. Then it was those books. We got to ban those books. They were discrediting public education so that the option of voucher sounds better.
Yeah.
And now they're implementing it. So this is a design, you know, I can't give her credit. She wanted to be in commerce. She didn't want to be in education. So she just happened to be the person, the billionaire donor that got the chair. But this work has been happening for since even before I became secretary. They're not going to they're not going to break it up, they're not going to get rid of it, but they've done enough damage that it's going to take decades to correct. Just the Office for Civil Rights being diminished the way it has been means children with disabilities are not going to get the supports that the law says they should get. And guess what? It's happening more in red states where they rely on federal guidance, federal dollars more. So we're going to see a generation of impact that's going to be significant. It's disheartening. I think it's by design. We talk about strategic and intentional planning. That's what's happening right now. Whether it's to dumb down, there's two theories here. Do we want to just keep America dumb so they could fall for anything? A lot of people believe that. I happen to believe it's more of a capitalism. Let's make a public good a commodity that you could buy now because there's money to be made. And I think we're seeing that now when we're taking public education dollars and giving it to schools. The only choice is the choice whether the schools want to take kids with disabilities or not. That's the only choice. It's not parent choice, it's school choice. So when we're taking public education dollars and funding schools that get to choose which kids they accept, I think that was the goal. And we're seeing in like over 30 states that are either doing vouchers or some credit so that parents want to take the voucher. Because the public schools, and I heard a superintendent, and I'll close with this, I had a superintendent tell me, they'll get the voucher, they'll take the student out of the school, go to an independent school, and then after the October 1st report, where you say how many students you have in the school, that determines formula funding, the students with disabilities or students who are harder to teach because they're behind or they have special needs are asked to go back to their neighborhood school because they don't have the services.
For the count, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was strategic design, yeah.
So I tend to agree with you. I mean, I do think that this is part of the story of corruption, right? That they are trying to undermine public education so as to outsource elementary education and middle school and high school education to the private sector so that it can be just another commodity, which leads me to my last question. Because if it is a story of corruption, then it is one of a million stories of corruption. And what is happening as this corruption is just playing out in public, right, without any shame, right? I mean, every day there's a new story of how the president is getting rich or his kids are getting rich, is that they are doing the same thing to democracy that they are doing to the education system. They are actually intentionally trying to undermine people's faith in democracy. And maybe I'll bring you back to the subject you know best, which is America's kids. One of my sons said to me at the beginning of all this, he said, well, but isn't it just that Trump's doing the thing that's happening every day out loud, Dad? Isn't it just that, everybody's got their hands in the till? And he's like, and I looked at him and he's like, well, I know you don't, but don't all your colleagues do this? And I was like, these people, you've grown up around my colleagues. Yeah. Even my son thought that the corruption of Trump was just normal. We were just seeing it in a way that didn't exist. And that's not true, right? That's not actually how the Senate operates, how the Connecticut state legislature operates. People that are literally stealing from the Treasury are the extreme outlier, but it speaks to a generation of young people that aren't participating in politics and government because they think that the whole enterprise is corrupt. Now, I've got an idea on how to fix that. I think that my party has to make getting big money, billionaire money, corporate money, anonymous money out of politics our number one issue. We've got to show that if you elect us, we are serious about reform, and we're getting into politics for just this one question. But how do you think about how to, given the corruption that is sort of on display, even at the Department of Education, how do you convince young people that this is still worth fighting for?
It's a great question. It's a great way to end this part of the conversation. I got into education because I love serving kids. I love seeing potential get realized. It was a tap on my shoulder from a teacher that made me believe I could be a teacher. to this day, I still have relationships with students who are, they have their own kids now, and it brings me joy. The first person I noticed in the room, love you and everything, but it was Brian Cofrancesco, former 4th grade student at Israel Putnam School, who's now doing amazing things in Connecticut. Youth have always had a voice. We're just not designed to listen. Nothing major in this country has ever happened without youth leading it. Not participating, leading it. So sometimes we put these walls up of what we think, where they fit in to the work that we're doing. And then every once in a while, they say, screw that, we're going to go around this way. I wear this bracelet that was given to me by a 3rd grader like 3 years ago when I was secretary. It says, good trouble. And it's a reminder that Congressman John Lewis was 25 years old when he crossed that bridge. And he was willing to take the lumps at 25 years old because he believed in something. Think about the major things that have happened in this country. There's always been youth leading it. I have confidence in our democracy because I have confidence in our youth. They're going to find out, they're going to realize and be done with this nonsense and say, I'm tired of it. We're going to do it this way now. And I'm here for it. Our schools have to do better engaging our youth, not just in performative exercises, but in leadership. Yeah. And what should schools do? How should they function? I think our youth are seeing what's happening in this country and how we're so divided, and they're getting fed up with it. And I'm starting to hear, I'm starting to see them coming out and saying, you know what, we're done. We're done. We're seeing it in some of the primaries across the country. And I think that's going to continue. I always say, what is it, the law of thermodynamics? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Well, Newton's law, I think. We are now, I think the pendulum is over here, and I think it's going to start swinging this way because people are just tired of it. And it's going to be our youth that's going to lead us through this. And I think what we need to do, and I say this kind of half-jokingly to our youth, I'm like, sorry, my generation screwed things up for you, but I have confidence that you're going to take us out of it. And I really believe that. Whether it's education, leadership, where we need to go, our moral compass, embracing the diversity of our country. It's going to be that generation that really we need to learn from. And if we overstructure where they can speak, let's be prepared to see them come outside of that box and do it their way. Yeah. And, I think the value of education, and to put a point on it, the value of education is not to teach people things, concrete or rote things. It's to get them to be thinkers so that they can decide what they value and what they're going to fight for. And build those roots in those values that they have. And, as we celebrate the 250th birthday of our country, democracy has always taken hits. It's always been under attack, but it's persevered. And I have complete confidence that it'll persevere through this storm as well.
Round of applause for Miguel Cardona.
Thank you.
So you have a wide array of topics to ask questions on here because we can go to the founding of the nation or to the current threats. Let me just ask my team how we're going to do questions. Just recognize people. So there you go. You get the first one. So.
Oh, thank you. Maggie Mitchell-Salem with Iris, based in New Haven. Thank you. This has been an amazing 2 hours, and it's flown. So. Really appreciate this conversation. I have to read from AI on my phone, sorry. NBC News poll this week that I'm sure some of you saw says that most Americans believe in the founding ideals of the country, but they don't think that there's enough education about democracy. So, how do we educate young people, all people, about our democracy at a time when we probably disagree about a lot, the most?
Yeah. Well, let's maybe start with our teachers here.
I was with a group of students this past semester, an entry-level survey-style course, 100 level. Most of the students coming in had zero interest in history at all. My favorite students to teach, right? Because I always tell them I have two goals. One is that you find history more interesting than you thought it was, and two, that it's more relevant to your own life than you thought it was. And towards the end of that course, we had spent a lot of time on the Declaration of Independence, and I asked the students, and to your point about the youth, where are our youth at? I said, how many of you have faith in the American government? 40 students in the class, not one student raised their hand. I said, how many of you have faith in democracy as a system of government? Not one student raised their hand. And this is not just CCSU students, and we're all CCSU people up here, by the way. I was then at a prep school with 200 students in the audience. I asked them the same question, it was the same response. But when I specifically said, well, okay, do you believe in the essential elements of the Declaration of Independence, of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness? Do you believe in the fundamental humanity of all people? Everybody raised their hand. So I come away from that thinking about that, we talk during this period of the revolution of the Tree of Liberty. The Tree of Liberty, I think, is quite sick right now, but the roots are solid. They're really intact. Right? And so I just want to add one last thing based on what Secretary Cardona was talking about. We are witnessing, I've done a lot of work on 9/11. The generation that has grown up in the first quarter of the 21st century is the only generation in American history that has never seen functional government. Right? They've never seen functional government. Right? Nothing but fighting and infighting and just nothing seeming to go right. And that has a profound impact on how they think about democracy as a system. And so when you're looking at the founders and the arguments over a liberal, education, over the humanities, and what should we be studying? Should our schools only be for, a trade? I mean, we're facing this in our schools right now. We're getting rid of arts programs. We're getting rid of cultural programs in the higher education. We're getting rid of these programs. If you go back and look at the people who created this nation, the founders, they read and studied everything. Their interest was in humanity. They studied every facet of human nature: science, art, literature, poetry, philosophy, everything. That's what made this experiment possible, and we've got to get back to it.
Well done. We'll do that one, and then over here. You next.
Hi there. Thank you for this wonderful talk. It's been amazing. My name is Victoria. I'm from Discovering Amistad. So I first want to say thank you for bringing up the Amistad story. It is not talked about enough in this state. So at Discovering Amistad, it is our privilege to bring the history to students across our state, whether in the classroom or at the ship. But obviously, with a lot of things going on in our country right now, with DEI and Black history being attacked constantly, what do you think is the most important way for us to protect these histories and not letting them disappear?
Great question.
So look, I'm gonna be very frank. I was in Austin a couple days ago talking to leaders over there, school leaders, district leaders who are struggling to keep their jobs if they bring up diversity or whatever. Hold on, just hold on. It's not gonna last too much longer. Kind of reminds me of the pandemic, really. It was really bad. We had to change right away. We've been online and whatever. And then things started to get better. Then we had Omicron. Remember that? Delta. This will pass, and this is not representative of what the Conservative Party thinks. I tell leaders, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Hold on. I need you in 5 years. Don't be a kamikaze. Hold on. This will pass. And, I say that now confidently, but, 5 years ago when the governor was asking me to come up with a reopening plan in the school for the state when we had no vaccines, we had no tests, I was scared as hell. It felt existential for me, for every. This will pass, democracy will prevail, and we need you there when the skies open up again and the storm is gone. firmly believe, I'm speaking very personally here, we're walking into lame duck session right now. And people we're starting to see it, even on the other side. And Republicans are starting to stand up a little bit. A little too late, but I felt it was after the primary season where they don't have to worry about being primaried because they have to face their constituents. I do think things are going to get better. So my message to you, to leaders across the country, is similar. Just hold on. We're going to be okay. And start building intentional community like we talked about earlier.
I have moments of optimism like that. And they are caused by the fact that if you really do look at the history of this nation, it is broadly a straight line, right? This is a country that is getting more tolerant, more inclusive. Civil rights are spreading, not contracting. But you know, if you look more closely, it's this, right? We go back and forth, but the arc is heading in the right direction. And this is obviously a very difficult moment, but if you believe in the overall trajectory, we will correct. But I do think that there is a direct correlation between the way that people are feeling in America today, lonely, exhausted, and powerless, and the ability of scapegoat messaging, right? And that's what DEI is, right? It's that you know, you should be threatened by Black people, by immigrants, by anybody that's different than you. I mean, this is a message that has succeeded politically over the ages. And it tends to work best in, as Hannah Arendt says, a nation of people that don't feel roots. And so, you know, yesterday I unveiled a proposal to increase the federal minimum wage to $25 an hour, and that is like, you know, to a lot of people, that's a ridiculous, 7 to 25. But but I could make an argument that the most important thing we need to do in order for you not to feel threatened to teach the true history of this nation, right, the Amistad history, is for people to make $25 an hour. And what do I mean? It's that if people wake up every day feeling powerful, feeling like they have agency, feeling like they have roots, and not feeling constantly under threat, then they're going to be less liable to believe these ridiculous messages that we are weaker as a country if we teach anything about our nation's weakest moments. And so to me, that means the project is big, right? And maybe it passes, but maybe we won't really be safe to teach the true history, to celebrate diversity, until we make people secure and powerful enough in their independent lives that they aren't as attracted by these demagogic messages.
Can I just,
yeah, please.
Can I just add? I just think it's very important at a time when we're facing, you know, a lot of economic insecurity, that we don't. Part of keeping the history that they're trying to erase is that we feel unable to support it. Mm-hmm. And on this may seem like a cheap shot here, but you know, I publish a magazine that people are not subscribing to as much because they feel strapped for money. Mm-hmm. Because they feel there are other things they have to put things toward. And every person who works in a museum in this audience knows this, or works for a nonprofit, right? Mm-hmm. You're not getting the support. But if we abandon that support, then things fall apart, right? So not only do I support your your initiative for a bigger minimum wage, but I also think that it's really important that we don't let economic insecurity crush our support, whether that's, maybe we can't give as much financially, but you can still go to the Amistad, you can still go to museums, you can still go to your library and read Connecticut Explored, you can still make sure that the things you care about remain.
Yeah, it's about the protection of leisure time as a national priority, right?
Yes.
Because what happens in leisure time, it's that you learn, right? It's you expand your horizons. You might find your primary identity in your leisure time, write a group that you belong to, your participation in the PTO. So, yes.
This magazine that Kathy does, Connecticut Explorer, is the best magazine. If you're interested in Connecticut history, it is the best magazine that is out there. It's amazingly done. And I just want to add one last thing. Do you know the motto of Hartford?
Hartford?
Yeah. Anybody know the motto of Hartford? Post nubila fabis, after the clouds, sun.
Yeah.
Really?
Right? To your point.
Yeah. Go ahead, front row.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jameem. I'm from Bridgeport, Connecticut, from like Bridgeport, Connecticut. But anyway, I have a question. It's not fully formed, but a question about democracy and corruption. I run a nonprofit organization. It's a community organization in Bridgeport, and we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, and we've been working really hard to get people more civically engaged. And to get people more civically engaged in Bridgeport has been a very difficult task because what you describe in your book around people in this country, we're in kind of a spiritual fight, right? So, and not spiritual in the religious sense, but in the sense that we don't know exactly where we're going, what we're doing. We have lost faith in our institutions. And in Bridgeport, the primary institution that has corrupted the electorate is our Democratic Town Committee. And I am a Democrat, so I just want to say, but it's our Democratic Town Committee. And it has decimated our democracy. We do not have free and fair elections in Bridgeport. And the last two mayoral cycles, we've seen absentee ballot abuse explode. We've had 11 people been arrested. People are on trial right now. And every time an election comes up, we are disappointed in Bridgeport because nobody in the state, from our state party to our elected officials, come and stand up for the people. And so when you are a city, just like when you're an individual and you're isolated, you often feel like, what is the point of all of this? We have in Bridgeport about 11% of the electorate comes out to vote in a mayoral election. So I guess my question really to you is, when is the party, and it could be across party lines, when are leaders in the country going to really stand up and say, like, enough is enough? And care about those of us who have been left behind. Bridgeport is a primarily Black and brown city, and we do not have a functioning democracy. So I'd like to hear some talk about that in the 250.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm not going to get into Bridgeport Town Committee here, but I do think that what broadly ails our democracy is that people have been participating and not seeing anything get better. People are literally entertaining giving up on democracy, in part because they have seen it work for the billionaires, for the corporations, for the politically powerful, and not for them. And until democracy delivers in big ways, and again, that's why I introduced this $25 minimum wage bill, was that I want to show that there are still some big ideas left. I think it's going to be hard for people to decide to participate. Listen, I want this party and I want the Republican Party to open its doors and not be a closed system, because that is also what ails us, is that young people don't feel like they have a role in the organized party structure. It's why on my side of the aisle, more and more young people are looking at alternative systems, right? I just think that we have to start delivering in a much bigger way, or you're going to have a hard time making anybody believe in this enterprise.
Yeah, and I also don't want to comment on information that I don't have. I don't want to comment on Bridgeport, but I will say that you mentioned leaders. Leadership doesn't necessarily require letters after your name or a title or there's leaders, everyone in this room is a leader. And oftentimes, some of the best leadership comes from a group of people that are just, they want something new, whether it's within the system or outside of the system. So I would just say, I think throughout our country, you could make the case similarly that people don't, what's happening at the federal level. So many people are discouraged by that. We don't want to encourage them to just not vote or not get involved. We want them to get involved. Similarly at every level. But I would tell you to be encouraged by the fact that leadership doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a part of a structural system that's designed in a way that you're not proud of, right? Leadership can come in different forms, and it seems like that might be something to just kind of think about as you're thinking about how can we make change and how can we talk to youth about making change. There's many ways of doing it, and sometimes we limit ourselves when we think there's only one structure to create change.
But it's frustrating.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It's frustrating to, come up, and I can't speak to the situation in Bridgeport. I believe you, but I can't speak to it. But it's frustrating to come up against a body where you feel that you can't express things or that they will listen, that they've already made up their minds, or you can't penetrate the system in some way. And I would just say that, look back to the revolutionary experience. One thing that they did in the revolutionary era was, if there wasn't a legal committee to do something, they formed an extra legal group. That doesn't mean an illegal group, right? It doesn't mean vigilantism, but they formed other kinds of groups to combat a structure they couldn't penetrate, right? And I think that's sometimes what has to happen. You have to make noise. And I'm sure it's frustrating because I'm sure people have tried, right? And it doesn't seem to work, and how do you energize? But I think educating people about what they did in the revolutionary era is also a way for them to see strategies. It's a good time to talk about this.
I think that's right. All right, we're going to go one more to the back.
Thank you so much for this discussion. It's just been absolutely inspiring to listen to this dialogue and to the panel, so thank you. So my question is, have any legislative pathways been explored that could put bipartisan guardrails on AI without demonizing it? For example, a bill that would support education where the backdrop of thriving external communities, such as parks and museums, could be a space to get youth inspired to moderate their social media and AI use.
Well, before leaving, we put out some guidance around AI policy. Not saying this is your policy, but saying this is what you should be thinking about if you're a local board of education, if you're a state board of education, if you're a leader. This is how you need to get people's voice in there. But I'm gonna be very honest with you, before I left DC, I had a conversation with Google, I had conversations with Meta, and I said, we have an opportunity to protect kids. Let's not do what happened with the internet. Let's not do what happened with social media. We have an opportunity to protect kids as we grow, because trust and credibility are at stake. And after the election, you saw what happened. There was no interest there. It became just wild. And that's why in this chapter of my leadership journey, I choose to engage in conversations around this. I choose to support groups whose job it is to try to create protections and safeguards. I've not seen something that I could say this is the best example of it, but I will tell you that at the state and local level, you could speak better at the federal level of what's coming up now, but I know people are trying to figure it out, and I do believe it's bipartisan. The closer you get to the student, the more bipartisan it feels. So I know across the country, and that's where the Department of Education could provide guidance, right? And that's where we don't have that. So we're gonna have disparate efforts, and we're gonna have 50 states trying to reinvent the wheel instead of having one agency that says, hey, North Dakota, look at what Tennessee's doing. Mm-hmm. But they are working on it at a local level, and then what I'm trying to do now is just try to lift up those practices or try to engage with folks who are doing it and trying to bring some national exposure to it.
Listen, the first thing I think we should do is we should just have some hard lines for what technologies our kids can access and cannot access. I mean, I think you have to treat social media and certain aspects of AI, not all of AI, but certain aspects of AI, like these romance bots, as a poison for kids, as a poison. And you've just, as a society, got to say, at a certain age, we are not going to allow you to have that access, and put some liability on the companies if they don't protect kids from it. And then I think it's a much more interesting conversation about, what is going to happen in education. And I think it would be perfectly appropriate for either the Federal Department of Education or state departments of education to essentially license products that are going to be used by teachers in our schools. Because if it's totally unlicensed, then the companies are going to do exactly to the teachers what they do to the kids, addict them to the technology, keep you in a closed system, not let you out. And so I do think if we're going to unleash these new powerful AI systems on our classrooms, like we are careful about what medicines we give you, we test them first for safety, we test them to make sure there's beneficial use, that we should probably do that to these AI systems. So I think they're the beginning of discussions there, but the AI companies are spending gazillions of dollars in our politics right now to try to beat candidates who are proposing things like that. Let me finish by returning to Kathy and Mappy. This has been the most unique part of our afternoon, is getting to think on this 250th anniversary, what role Connecticut has played. Closing thoughts from our two historians, but also maybe some things that we haven't talked about here today, that as Connecticut commemorates 250 years of a nation, and far longer as a model of democracy, final thoughts, but also pieces of Connecticut's story that you think should be lifted up this summer. Kathy, we'll start and finish with you, Matt.
Well, thanks. It's been a real pleasure to be here and to have this conversation. So as somebody who began my historical work studying Puritans, those unpopular people of the past, one of the things that surprised me as I got more into studying them was that they believed in the power of argument. They believed that if you argued enough, you would come to the truth. And by argument, they didn't necessarily mean adversarial, hateful kinds of speech, but discourse, what we might call vigorous discourse. And they would trek miles to go have arguments with people. And I think one of the things that also came out of the Puritan movement, both in England and America, was the idea of toleration. And we talk more about inclusion today rather than toleration, because toleration now, I think, feels antiquated, but I'm going to make a push for it. Toleration is, I don't have to agree with you, I don't have to like you, I don't have to believe anything that you believe, but I also recognize your right to believe it, and I can coexist with you, and we can talk about things. I don't have to actually include you, right, if I don't want to. But I recognize that you have as many rights as I do to engage in the conversation. And I think that's such an important idea. And it's been embraced by every group that came to America as an immigrant group. Eventually, everyone has to embrace it, because you can't get along in a culture where you can't talk to people, right, or cross aisles. So we do find ourselves in a unique moment now, maybe not entirely unique, we've had them in the past, but it's a difficult time where we don't feel we can talk. So I urge you to go back to that idea of toleration. And I think the 250th celebrates ideas of rights, inalienable rights. Inalienable rights are not rights that can't be taken from you. They're rights that you can't sell or give away. They're rights that are so inherent to you, you can't abrogate them yourself, right? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. So these are ideals worth remembering. We haven't been perfect in the past in making sure everybody has them, but we can keep trying.
Matt?
Well, first, I want to understand better why Kathy was looking at me when she said, "I don't like you, I don't agree with you."
You guys should be like a history reality show.
At least you're tolerable.
But he's tolerable.
But I think what Kathy hit on, and that is the core of this entire conversation, is this question of liberty. And I talked about earlier the idea of liberty to or liberty from, right? And what we are facing in this country right now is, I think in particular, a group of people who think they understand what proper liberty is, and they are going to deny you your liberty, your choice to be who you want to be or do what you want to be. That is a fundamental problem that we're facing. I think what's so important about a conversation like today is that we're doing exactly what a commemoration should do. We're not up here just talking about patriotism and how great America is and how great Connecticut is. And I mean, one of the things that I have been most fascinated with history for the last 40 years has been what I refer to as the American paradox, that the Declaration of Independence is this just foundational human document. It's not a foundational American document. It's a human document. It is that pebble in the pond that ripples throughout the world so that people see themselves and think about their own rights and their own humanity. And if we think about it in that context, that this is it places this idea before us, we have never achieved it. We've never achieved it, but we've strived to achieve it. And that's what we have to keep doing. And just so, I mean, my final thought is, if you go back to the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, we had serious problems, much like we have today. Incredible corruption, the Gilded Age, right? I mean, what is Donald Trump doing to the Oval Office? But gilding it, right? Mm-hmm. All the gold and right. I mean, it's like such a metaphor for what's going on. We are in America's second Gilded Age. What followed the Gilded Age? The Progressive Era. Thank you. Now she gets 3 credits. We get the Progressive Era. This period of remarkable 20 to 25 years of incredible reform that ultimately allows us to embrace the New Deal. And my hope, if I'm going to look optimistically, my hope is that's where we're headed. So to your question about, what can we do about AI and, what's the policy? And I think the policy, the specificity of the policy is less important than creating the culture of reform and having people get to that point of going, I am fed up with this. I'm so fed up with this. And I think you're right. I think our kids are waking up. I think our kids are waking up to this, and I'm hoping that these midterm elections are the thing that I hope that the entire Congress is swept by the Democrats, and I hope we watch that becomes the stone that falls out of the dam and the waters come rushing in. That's my great hope, and what a better year to have it in than at the 250th anniversary. So can you assure me of that, Senator?
I can. I'm so grateful for you all to have been part of this. I cannot give you a guarantee, but I just will double click your final point, right? That transition from the Gilded Age to the Progressive Era is this combined mission. It's government acting, right? Lots of actions by government to curtail the concentrated power of those barons, but lots of non-governmental actions, right? Lots of things.
It's a cultural movement
that citizens just do, right? So, my favorite story from that period of time is that in a 5-year period of time, from 1910 to 1915, all of the local service clubs that you recognize by name, Civitan, Kiwanis, Lions, Rotary, are all formed in this 5-year period of time because citizens just decide that they want their lives to be defined by service, giving back to their community, rather than by being actors or pawns in this sort of jarring economy that seems to just consolidate economic power into the hands of a few. So it's a wonderful study in history of how government and citizens together decide to build a new, more stable foundation for our democracy. Give a round of applause to our great panel. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
It's great. It's really wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks for doing that, man. Yeah, good to see you.
Thank you. It's always good to see a CCSU guy.